The Oracl3 Network.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 1693 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASF. Route 291 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Now, there's been a shooting in the U.S. city of Indianapolis. Local media say multiple people have been taken to hospitals in the area. Police were called to respond to reports of shots fired at a FedEx facility on the southwest side of the city near Indianapolis International Airport. Now, police have confirmed that the gunman is dead and say they do not believe the general public is in immediate danger.
After a preliminary search of the grounds, inside and out, we have located 8 people at the scene with injuries consistent to gunshot wounds. Those 8 were pronounced deceased here at the scene.
The worldwide pandemic created so much tragedy and trauma that goes far beyond our physical health. Depression, anxiety, and loneliness have run nearly as rampant as the virus that has stolen so many lives. The number of mass shootings that have occurred in the time of this pandemic have increased at an alarming rate. Whether the two are even remotely correlated may be debated by some, but one thing is certain. There is so much media coverage saturating our daily lives with the talk of viruses and protests, shootings, and politics that now more than ever, we must examine these terrible tragedies that continue to rock our worlds. We must not lose sight of the victims and the stories of those who survived these events, and we should never, ever stop trying to understand the why of it all. Perhaps if we can get to the root of the problem and continue shining a light on reasons for violence, then maybe we can get to a place where they become less frequent and altogether prevented. There is a very distinct line connecting so many mass shooters to a deep need for serious mental health treatment, and we need to continue discussing both. The shooting at the FedEx Indianapolis on Thursday, April 15th, 2021, was perpetrated by yet another individual who displayed a need for mental health treatment. His red flags may not be the kind that always predict a future killer, but they certainly cause enough concern that obtaining the proper mental health treatment should be automatic, provided as a means to prevent violence, rather than being purely reactionary.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. In today's episode, we will refer to the shooter
as Gary. Thursday, April 15th, 2021 was overcast, slightly rainy. It was a spring night in Indianapolis, Indiana. The FedEx Indy building, located about 5 miles from the Indianapolis International Airport at 8951 Mirabel Road in Marion County, was operating at full capacity, as usual in the 300,000 square foot building that was used primarily for sorting packages. On this day, not one of the nearly 100 employees were slightly prepared for the shocking and gruesome shooting that would change their lives forever going forward. 8 people went to work, believing they would return home after their shift. They would never see the light of another day, and they left home without ever knowing that saying, "I love you," or kissing their loved ones goodbye would be the last time. Most probably took those little daily opportunities to love our people for granted, as most of us do. 8 people were robbed of those future precious and insignificant moments, and it is utterly senseless. Another 7 individuals were injured in varying degrees, and they too must live a life that has been irrevocably changed. At approximately 11 p.m., 19-year-old Gary drove his Toyota Camry into the parking lot of the FedEx building. He was wearing either a hat or a hooded sweatshirt. It was the middle of shift change and lunch breaks, which seems to be a perfectly executed part of his plan.
Well, I was working a normal day at FedEx, and I was planning on working another shift that night with my friends, and so it was 11 o'clock at night when this incident happened.
He parked and walked around the back to the trunk, where he collected a Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle and an HM-15F semi-automatic rifle. As Gary pulled the firearms from the trunk, he started firing.
When I hear 6 shots fired rapidly, and then I hear 10 shots, this is when I stand up, and I'm sitting on a bench. And so when I stand up, I see a man, a hooded figure. I was unable to see his face in detail. However, the man did have an AR in his hand, and he started shouting, and then he started firing at random directions. But at first, it was at his right, and I thought he saw me, and so I immediately ducked for cover.
Simultaneous to the start of the gunfire, employees were pulling into the parking lot for the start of their shifts. But once they saw Gary standing in the parking lot shooting a gun, they quickly reversed and fled as bullets were flying at the rear of their automobiles. Gary was shooting at cars as they drove away, and the drivers were terrified at what they just saw.
Opened my chips, got my sandwich, about to take a bite. He was about to take a bite out of his sandwich, and we heard 2 loud metal clangs at first, because they didn't sound like gunshots at first. They made, because there was a loud clang after the first 2, and then my buddy Levi stood up as he was like kind of squatting at the bench, and then looked over and out into the parking lot. Didn't see anything yet, and then we heard 3 more shots, and then my buddy Levi saw someone running out of the building, and then more shots went off.
Some employees believed what they were hearing was simple fireworks, but that didn't really make sense. It was dark out, yet there was no flashing or booming in the sky. One person thought a car backfired.
We heard 2 gunshots from inside the building, and I did not witness anyone enter. I assumed it was a muzzle problem with a car because we were I was outside of the building when this happened, and across from the building is the parking lot.
The terror each individual must have experienced when it dawned on them that they were being attacked must have been overwhelming. Gary shot for about 3 minutes straight before entering the building, where he walked into a locker room and began shooting again, striking more people.
Caller heard 10 shots from near the front of the entrance.
Mercifully, Gary was prevented from getting further inside the building by security barriers. There were metal detectors and a badge scanning system in place. Gary didn't work there, so he had no way in, which likely prevented many more deaths. Despite the security measures, employees were obviously petrified, and therefore, those that couldn't safely run away hid underneath conveyor belts in the very interior of the building. A witness described hearing Gary yelling, yet they couldn't tell what he was saying.
I could not describe what exactly he was yelling about. However,
because the company had a no-phone policy, not one employee inside the building had a cell phone on them and couldn't immediately call 911. The shooting lasted under 4 minutes, though it probably felt like 4 hours to the survivors, likely knowing that it wouldn't be long before the police started showing up. Gary shot and killed himself, right there, in the locker room. The first 911 call came through at 11:07 p.m., and there were 97 911 calls placed. The first responding officers arrived very shortly afterwards. Almost immediately upon arriving, they located Gary with 2 rifles, though the threat was gone as Gary was very much dead by then. At 11:23 p.m., a radio call was dispatched from an officer stating that the potential body of the shooter was recovered, and he appeared to be dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The first media briefing was held at 3 a.m. on Friday morning, where the police reviewed as much information with the public as they could, while maintaining the integrity of the investigation. 4 of the deceased victims were found outside of the building, while the other 4 were discovered by the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, who were the initial responding officers. 5 survivors were hospitalized for their injuries from the shooting, while an additional 2 were treated by EMS at the scene and released. Some of the wounded individuals were located inside their cars.
I don't know, she called us. I was sleeping at home, so she said they're shooting in the FedEx. So we just drove from Brownsburg, and she got a shot on her left arm.
Is she okay?
She's fine. She's in the hospital now.
Did she know the person who did this?
She said, I don't know. She was in the parking lot sitting on the drive seat.
The Marion County Coroner's Office was on scene and worked as quickly as possible to identify the deceased. 4 of the victims were members of the Sikh community, though the investigation has shown that doesn't appear to be a motive for the attack.
2 to 3 people shot at this time. The reference that read my caller said it was a white male in a black hoodie armed with a shotgun. She never saw him leave the building. She's no longer on scene. Person shot. He is outside in the parking lot. He said he's in a black Buick Rendezvous. EMS is en route.
Suspect ran into the field right across from the parking lot.
Suspect ran to the field right across from parking lot. State approximately 5 people shot.
Additional cars, just information if you're not clear on Southwest. They have an active shooter currently at FedEx. They're reporting at least 5 people shot.
352 is just passing 465 and I-70. I'll set up on the west perimeter. Whoever's behind me, stick with me.
Multiple people shot at FedEx at 8951 Mirabelle Road. Information only at this time, 2317.
I'm getting information that he's still inside the building from somebody pulling off the lot.
Control, we got another one down in front of the building.
Control, that subject looks possibly 10-0. Subject possibly 10-0.
Control, there's 2 more down in the car in the parking lot, and a white Toyota Camry.
2 more down, car in parking lot, white Toyota Camry.
Control, make sure Hampton Inn and Hilton Garden knows, and they can control their sites, lock them down.
Control, advise Eskenazi will have multiple patients. Advise them to be ready. Advise St. Vincent's.
10-4, we're calling the hospitals.
311, we need somebody to clear the roadways at the entrance there. There's too many cars stacked up. We're not going to be able to get ambulances in here.
Keep a route coming in. Keep a route open coming in.
There's a rifle inside here.
Who has located casualties?
David 323 has a person shot, conscious, barely.
All right, I think we got the suspect here inside. It looks like he's got a gunshot wound to the head, 10-0. 2 rifles here. So, unless there's another person out, this is going to be our suspect here. 4 more down inside the building.
Attention all units, there is only 1 shooter, gunshot wound to the head. He is down.